All right. I know, right? I love this thing. I just got it. Actually bought something for myself. Super comfy. Got this nice like fleece lining. We are waiting on Sonia to join. I sent her an invite and she sent me an invite, and I see if either of them worked. Yeah, I accepted your request and I sent you an invite. So I don't know. Let's send another invite. IG Live's a piece of shit. Never works the first time. Ever.
We did it.
IG Live never works the first time. You have to send at least 2-3 invites every time.
Yeah, I know. Well, you requested me and I accepted, and then I wasn't in, and then I requested you, and then I wasn't in. It's just a whole shebang going on there.
Shit. You all should be in Vegas. I am so done with bodybuilding for the year. I could give two shits about the Olympia, to be completely honest. They're the 0.1% of genetics that have no relevancy to my life.
I love watching the O. Like I love watching parties. I love watching it. Like it's fun. It's exciting, but it's not where I would. And I'm just not like in the sport of bodybuilding in the sense of like when I'm not competing, I'm not in it as much. When I'm competing, I'm like in it. But I wouldn't choose to vacation there for that. Give me a sunny beach.
I mean,
I'm there for it.
I don't know. I guess. I mean,
I'd rather spend my money on PEC in Tampa in January, if you know what I mean.
Yep, I hear that. I've been to, so we also have the Arnold Classic, like right in my backyard, which is always a good pro show too. So, I mean, it's not the Olympia, obviously, but like I can go like 40 minutes and sit in the front row there if I want to see something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's some good action that comes to the Arnold as well. Did you see that they're not bodybuilding this year?
I heard that, but then I saw that they reconfirmed. So I don't know. They've done some weird. They've done some weird stuff because they also got rid of like 212 there for the pros and a couple other things, which is like, I don't know, but
I like the Arnold because the Arnold is a little bit of everything. I really want to go. The year I was supposed to go, 2 days before is COVID out, is like when COVID started. And we had an outbreak a mile down the street of from my house. It's like where the center of COVID started in the West Coast. So, and then they canceled the Arnold, and then all this stuff happened. So it's like, all right, well,
it was a mess.
There goes my opportunity. But I'm hoping to come this year, like up in 2023. I'm excited to go.
The expo is, I mean, if you've never seen it, it might be cool. You'll probably never want to do it again after you do it. Like the events are sweet.
Okay.
Like there's a.
I really love.
Well, the thing is, they don't give out that many anymore. Like they used to just like. They used to just be like, open your book bag and like, you know, and now it's just. I don't know if it's like a financial thing or what, but and plus it's so crowded. But the events are cool. There's a lot of stuff. You know, if you're gonna go. Yeah. If you're going to go, get tickets to the actual bodybuilding show. You have to. If you're going to spend.
I got to look at schedule and everything. This is the other thing, too. It's expensive to fly to Ohio.
It's a small airport.
So
you know,
crazy.
It's like.
But it's, I don't know. Tampa's, I mean, well, like.
Florida is a vacation destination. That's why Vegas is so cheap.
I know, but it's $400 for me to fly from Vegas. Well, I'm saying like
to fly there. So like for example, if you fly from here to I don't know any like small airport, like I flew to like Philadelphia or something that's like only 5, 6 hours away, it's going to cost quadruple the amount than to fly to like LA. And that's because the destination, like
Yes.
there's so few options. But I know because I live
I
here,
know.
so I
That's
pay
like
for that shit
North
all the
Carolina.
time. But
I know. It's expensive to travel
true.
anywhere right now. Like the difference in travel this in the last 6 months to like the 6 months
Yeah,
prior is like night and day
for sure.
difference. It's
I I did
awesome, but
I
we're
did
still
get
out here
some
doing it.
questions, so we can. Cool.
I did too.
So let's start. Yep.
Why don't you hit yours and I'll hit mine? And then if anyone listening has questions, you can put it in the little like talk box with the question mark in there, and then we can do those as well, especially since you're
Yes. So
on.
we were trying to focus, guys. We were trying to focus on training, cardio, activity, all these things in the functional health space. So in these compromised kind of individuals, right? So let's start with what I had. So probably the most obvious question, and I did get a bunch of questions that weren't even relevant to the topic. So, but anyhow, um, yeah.
We'll see where we are
So
with
first one
time.
was probably the most obvious one. I think what a lot of people want to know is what are the considerations to completely pulling training in these cases? Because that's kind of a hot topic and a touchy one. So um, I'll
Yeah,
chime in a few things, and I'm sure you'll have some stuff to add. So
yeah,
I think that it's there's probably as much of a psychological consideration as there is like an actual physical consideration. So I always tell people like think of reduction versus elimination. So like let me give you an example. If someone comes in and they're training 7 days a week, well, if we put them down to three, that's a large reduction. Now, if someone's coming in and they're only training 3 days a week, and we need to reduce, then going to zero is about as an equal reduction as 7 to 4 or 7 to 3. So like if we look at it as like a total reduction of systemic stress load, not necessarily like you have to pull everything type of thing. So like think about that first, and then the
yeah,
second thing is think about what that time is going to be filled in with, right? This is super important because
yes,
sometimes on paper, yeah, it might look ideal that we can get through this process quicker. We can speed up healing by like just getting to the point and getting out of the gym. However, if you're sitting at home pacing around your house and twiddling your thumbs and stressing out, then, maybe that's not the best trade-off. So, it might be a case where we're leaving in some type of activity. It's just lower intensive, and we can talk about obviously like how we might do that. So you have to consider
yeah,
like how much are we starting with and what is the psychological environment, because it's not as easy as it sounds for folks to
yeah,
come in and
yes,
just yank everything out from under them. So go
100%.
ahead.
In in those specifically high volume cases, I think you nailed it. A lot of times it's not like these people have a high social life outside of the gym of activity in their life isn't filled with activities that bring them joy outside of the gym. If you're training 6 or 7 days a week, that is, and you also have a job, that is a majority of your free time
All
and
of
your
it.
social time outside of work being spent in one location. And most likely with those people, I know if I go to like my gym where it's like, that's my training gym, I'm there for hours at times because I'm talking to people beforehand, I'm talking to people afterhand, I might be eating my meal there. That is my social hour. But if you were to tell me I couldn't go to that gym, I never trained 7 days a week. It wasn't, I don't know those people, but if you told me like, especially during like hard times where like I was intensely training like 4 or 5 days a week, I was there and also training clients. If I couldn't train, that would take away a massive part of my social life. That would give me a lot of anxiety, depression, loneliness. And a lot of times sitting in those feelings when you're in a healing process is miserable. Serotonin might be low, dopamine might be low. So just overall joy is like your ability to create joy outside of having the neurotransmitter response from training is very low. So I find that like a lot different with food, whereas like food, you can be more extreme. I think slowly tapering down training and maybe like where's volume at? I love a good 3 days of like full body for clients because a lot of times they can recover a little bit better from a full body day. Maybe we're not doing like movements that take a lot of work for them to set up. So like no hip thrusts, maybe no squats, a lot of machine work, lowering, like it really depends on, I guess, what exactly for me, where the client has been with food. If they've been higher carbs or lower carbs, that'll also depend on what kind of training I'm going to do for them. But I think overall, I agree with Austin. I don't think pulling training out altogether is a great option. If anything, even just changing where you have some clients, I'll say this, I'm a little bit crazy. I have them, you have them. I love you guys. You know that I know you're like a little bit crazy. I've been a little bit crazy. It's fine. But sometimes you have to like really walk it down as well. And then they start having those aha moments. And then you can go, look how blood sugar looks. Look how sleep looks. Now imagine if we were just 1 day less a week and why don't you go on a date night, like slowly working through that process. So,
you made a really good point. Yeah. So something that I kind of present to people too, you talked about the people that is their social life, right? So, which that's a lot of people, but not every person has a functional health issue. So that's a little bit different. So something that I try to present to people is I'll ask them, outside of like going to the bar and getting drunk, like what things did you do before you were obsessively weight training, right? Like there had to have been something, right, for most people. And again, if it was some deleterious behavior, they were an addict or something, like we don't want to revert back to that, obviously. But but the problem with that question is most people don't have an answer. Like when I say what makes you happy outside of this, they can't answer that question. They don't. They'll be like, well, I like going on 20-mile hikes. I'm like, no. That's not it. That's, I'm like, that's not the correct answer. It's like what type of actual low intensive leisurely activity brings you joy, right? And
I like to challenge them with a hobby too. Like, what's a hobby you've always wanted to do? And they're like, I've always wanted to like make chocolate. And it's like, okay, it may not be the time to eat all that chocolate with that candida, but let's go take a chocolate making class or go to Michael's and do an arts craft or something like that. It's really important to do things outside of
So something that, and I do this with myself. I'm just like everyone else. I am OCD. I have a addictive personality, all the stuff. So something that with me is hobby, like things that I like, whether it's like a sport or anything, it's non-negotiable that I try to follow those things or keep up with those things or watch those things when I have time and implement that into my life. And the reason I do that is for exactly the reasons that we're talking about, is because I know that I need that diversity in my everyday life. So, challenging yourself to do those things, like Sonia said, is a perfect way to that might even just be a way to like segue you into a less training and maybe get you to the point where I would go as far as to say, like, I don't really like to pull training out all the way if I don't have to, like ultimately you do have to sometimes, but like I'm really trying to create the least.
And maybe we should talk about those caveats, like where do we always training?
Let's do that a little bit too. So I think that you kind of alluded to it already, in that we should realistically, most of the time, there's so many things wrong with these cases that like if we improve anything, there's going to be improvement. So for me, I start with that meet in the middle, right? I'm like, hey, this is where we're going to meet. Let's see how much improvement we get. However, if we still have 50% of the way to go, I'm just telling you now that we're going to have to pull more or pull all of it, right? And sometimes you don't have to. It's kind of like a gut protocol, right? Like some of those cases where you're like, I don't know if they need a SIBO protocol. Like, let's try these other things first. And sometimes they don't need it, right? Sometimes you don't don't have to do it.
Yeah. Sometimes they need.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
how kind of how I view the whole like pulling training out thing. It's like I'm probably not gonna do it right away unless the person's maybe already like bought in and they've worked on these issues for a while and they're kind of like at a point where we have to do it. If it's a person
Yeah.
that's like brand new to the functional health scene and I'm their first coach that they've worked with, I'm gonna probably use a softer approach. So those would probably be
Yeah.
the two different kind of like client scenarios that we would see.
Yeah. I think that I agree with all that, and I pretty much follow that as well. For me, the cases where I'm like, we're gonna pull training out, I'll replace with something. So I'll normally do like some sort of yoga, like, and I might do like, hey, I found this yoga that was like mobility work for hips. Like I've noticed you've got a lot of like in their intake, maybe they were talking about hip issues. Like, okay, so a lot of hip opener. I'll find it on YouTube and I'll just say, do this once a week and then 2 other yogas of your choice. Normally, this is somebody who has adrenal fatigue or somebody who has chronic EBV. So like elevated IgG, IgM, both of them will be elevated, like plus 600, like over a period of time. And maybe they haven't been able to get rid of it. High levels of
Antibodies,
Hashimoto's and
things like that.
EBV,
Sure.
just because it seems, yeah, exactly. It seems like in general, their recovery is just shit as it is. There's not, basically think about it as like a bunch of like a basketball team. That ball is not being thrown to go into the hoop to create energy. And we're better maximizing repair on like cellular tissue, thyroid, putting that energy of repair into other aspects of the body until we can actually go into training. But normally I'll do some sort of mobility work specifically on what their issues are, because
Sure.
honestly,
I mean,
we can all
it's still
we all
purpose
probably
driven,
need a little
right?
bit
It's
of
still
mobility work.
right, for sure.
It's still purpose driven, which is good for people
Right.
too, because it's like there's a mission here, like let's do glute activation and let's just small mobility in the hips and maybe like a shoulder mobility and do that as those 3 days. But
Yeah.
for viruses like that, especially when it comes to overactive immune systems, I find
Yep.
that just no
Yep.
training
Yeah.
is the way to go.
So the other
Yeah.
day, I'll give you a practical example, kind of goes off what you're saying. The other day I had a client, and we were at that point, right? We were like, all right, we're gonna have to pull it down to close to nothing. So what I had her do essentially was we took a rest week, and I said, during this rest week, what I want you to do is I want you to look around your area and I want you to see what kind of classes are offered in your area. Something that sparks your interest. That's not, and I kind of gave her like a list of things that were probably appropriate, right? That were low intensive. And I said, next week when you update me, let me know what you found. And then what we did is we essentially implemented like 2 days a week of some very low impact activity that we thought she would enjoy. So it gives that purpose. She still has something to do. And then, from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start encouraging those hobbies. I'm going to start encouraging like filling those gaps.
Yeah.
So, but that was a process, right?
These are people,
right?
These are people, not protocols.
And
human beings.
Frankly, I mean, most people in this space that we're purpose driven, we're type A, like we're not idle people. So I get that in my soul. You know what I mean? Like I understand. So let's go into a different question. I had a cardio question, which was pretty generic, but we can just talk about that like whole topic in general. And it was just like, what types of cardio or how would you program for a functional case? You want to start that one?
Yeah, sure. So it depends. I guess the first question with that is, where are they currently at with cardio? And can we utilize lists? So I think that you'll see lists just kind of put on there as like across the board, like, oh, everyone should be doing like this amount in functional cases. But it really does depend, because if a person is already dealing with specifically high cortisol symptoms, I guess we'll say symptoms in general, and they're already doing a lot of cardio, I'll normally back them down slowly, because there's a mental health component there that they physically feel they're like, I can't not do anything. You got to like walk them down. And I'll normally come down about 10 minutes every week to like, 50, 40, 30, 20, and I'll leave them at 20 just so they feel good. If I'm dealing with a gut dysbiosis case, I sometimes, or like what might be like, a metabolic resistance case, I'll normally start somebody at 40 to 50 minutes of LISS daily, or I'm sorry, of specifically outside
right,
movement.
for sure.
Let's kind of like, yeah, I call that what it is as a little bit different. I'm talking about like walking is kind of where I put people. So occasionally somebody might use a bike if it just like it's the weather or something like that, but normally I'll try to walk them outside. I find that walking, and if we can walk outside specifically, we're calming the body down. The gut tends to have more motility, so movement going through it. The system itself goes into a little bit more of like, okay, I can run off fatty acids a little bit more. I can oxidize fatty acids. My body is releasing this a little bit more. And it's not necessarily about fat loss in that phase. It's just about maximizing movement, blood sugar regulation, motility, and energy sources. Specifically, I do a lower carb approach, not like a keto necessarily, but I do a lower carb approach with gut cases. So that's kind of where that all plays into the need to keep it more low intensity, but longer duration.
Yep. It's just, it's really kind of the same thing as the training. Like, what's the starting point and how much, and then reduce. And it's kind of, I guess the exception would be, of course, if the person's doing like level 20 on the step mill all the time, like, of course, we're going to have to come in and clean that up a little bit quicker. But if they're doing mostly walking and stuff already, we can taper a lot of the time. I'm like you. I definitely don't see a lot of cases where I have to pull it to zero. I think movement's great. I think some movement is definitely great. Especially like if we're pulling a lot of training out, I want to have some type of movement in there. But it's always like you have to look at it as like total stress load of everything combined. It's not like cardio is its separate thing, right? And then food, like you're also equating caloric needs into this too. Like if we have a case where they're starting out they've been eating 800 calories and we're trying to walk them up, that's going to be a consideration also. Like what are their energy expenditure? And that's going to be different in a gut case versus like a hormone case, because in a gut case, if we're trying to walk someone's food up, we're going to have to be a little more careful potentially, because we already have dysbiosis, we have inflammation. So we have to be it's a little more tedious. Whereas in a hormone case that maybe doesn't have as much of a gut component, we might not have to deal with that as much. So there's a lot of considerations, but I would say in general, you don't have to do nothing. Right now, it kind of sucks.
There's actually like
right now it kind of sucks. Like if you're in a cold weather region, we're a little more limited. Some people don't mind it as long as you're not going to like go outside and get sick. Like cold exposure is not a bad thing. Like I like walking outside when it's cold sometimes, as long as it's not like 0. But
raining and cold.
So those would be general considerations. So I had one more. And it was a training one. This was if we are leaving in training, whether it's like 2-3 days a week, whatever it is, what kind of training may it look like? And so I'll start on that one. Okay. So biggest thing, and you kind of talked about it a little bit. The biggest thing is just, again, like what kind of ROI are we going to get on these movements, and also like what is the nervous system stress you're going to get? It's really just a nervous system thing, because you're compromised, your adrenals are compromised, you don't have the ability to respond to stress. So the first one and the most obvious one is like proximity to failure is going to be low. Okay, so we're not touching it, we're not going anywhere close to it. I would say that most of your really like hip hinging movements, a lot of like your heavy movements, that stuff's probably going to be out. We're talking machines, some cables, maybe some dumbbells. One thing I like to do with people too is if they can handle it, is it's because they enjoy this. Keeping them moving is like some lower intensity, like circuits, supersets, giant sets, stuff like that. It's great for glucose
Yeah.
utilization, so it's great for like controlling blood sugar, but it's also
Yeah.
it feels like you're doing more than what you are. So people enjoy that.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be able to do 3
Yes.
machines back to back at a low intensity. That's going to be way less taxing than like squatting to failure. So
Yes. Yes. It's,
so those are
yeah, 100% agree with
yeah.
that. I,
So I
I,
was gonna say that's kind of
go
like
ahead.
that's kind of the training that I would generally program people because I find that they just enjoy it a little bit more because they just feel like they're doing something.
Yeah. I like utilizing things like the circuit, like we talked about, or even just a higher rep range, like that higher hypertrophy rep range, like, 15 to even like 20. But lighter movements, like something like a bicep curl, like 21s, things like that, because they're getting that burn, especially if I'm utilizing a high increase in
Sure.
carbohydrates to bring cortisol up, or in high cortisol cases. A lot of times we need lots of carbohydrates, and like that drastic carbohydrate change in a person's body can be extremely beneficial. And if we can utilize that partitioning through like very glucose driven movement, we can normally get a lot better results and a lot less taxing. Like you said, like we've always talked about this. How long does it take you to set up a deadlift? How long does it take you to set up a squat, right? You're moving 45s, you're doing this, you're doing that. It's like, I know it doesn't seem like much, but it's a lot different than doing like muscle rounds on a leg
Yeah.
extension machine. Like you just get in, you sit down, you do your thing, you do your counts. And a lot of times their pump is really good. They're feeling motivated in the gym. They're getting what they want out of the gym, and you're not overtaxing them. And I'll keep in mind, like I'll normally do higher volume of those
Right.
movements, but I'll normally do like 5 movements, or like 1 circuit and 2 other movements, and then some mobility like activators, like plank work, core work, stuff like that. So they still have some of that duration, but we're not stressing the body, right? Like it's a great time to work on core when you're bringing overall CNS, like that stress on the body down, because, well, they're just abs and they recover really well. They can be pushed really hard. And a lot of times we're not spending that much time on them in our harder seasons anyways. So you can kind of utilize planks, mobility work, functional
Yeah. I
movement
have
patterns, stuff like that.
so again, like another practical example for you guys. I have a couple clients right now, one specifically that we did. So she came in and this was more of a hormone case, a little bit, not really a gut case. So we were walking up carbohydrates and switched over to mostly glucose intensive training. And guess what? We saw a huge change in blood sugar. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
that seems counterintuitive to a lot of people because they're thinking, oh, carbohydrate, blood sugar. But the thing that you have to remember is that insulin and cortisol are inverse to each other. Okay. So we increase carbohydrate, we generally control cortisol a little bit better, and we generally have a better stress response. And then we add that glucose intensive training on top of it, and now we're really becoming efficient at utilizing glucose. And then, later on, the
Yeah.
nice thing is once we kind of recover, they're in a really nice spot to go into that deficit if they get to that point, right? So it's like, we have some
Yeah.
we have some runway to use. So this girl specifically, we got her
Yeah.
built up to a really good point. Everything was recovered, hormones looked good. We kind of were topped out, and she responded to that deficit. She's like, bam, because we had X amount of carbohydrates and calories in. So
Yeah.
it's all, you know, it's all about energy systems and about CNS stress, really, at the end of the day.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that um, the understanding carbohydrates role in driving down both cortisol and blood sugar levels, client specific, obviously, is really important, because I think that a lot of times coaches will miss the mark thinking this person has high or dysregulated blood sugar, and then therefore we should start on a more moderate carb approach, and you're not seeing that change. I would recommend just throwing a week in there of maybe 275, 300 carbs, see how their body responds with that. you might be hitting those 88s, 87s, 79s before you know it. So
Yeah.
the body's an amazing thing. So
Sure.
I would say that that's kind of a very important one to kind of reconsider. It can be scary, but you do it anyways. And then the other thing I want to throw in there too is, because we're talking about blood sugar, making sure, this is a huge tool, making sure you're not just checking your waking cortisol or your waking fasted blood glucose. It's a great marker for your cortisol awakening response and stress, but how your body's utilizing carbohydrates, and are your blood sugars staying high? What does that look like throughout the day? Your postprandials are going to be the tall tale sign of proper utilization of glucose for that. So I have clients once a week or even twice a week, if we're doing some sort of carb cycle, take their postprandials for like 3 to 4 meals. So I can actually see, okay, are we ending up at 135 at the end of the night, but waking up at 88? Or are we going up and coming back down efficiently? Is our body working the way it's supposed to? Because that cortisol awakening response will definitely drive blood sugars up. If you don't eat enough carbs before bed, that can drive blood sugars up. There's different phenomenons that can happen. There's like 3 different options that can happen with blood sugar dysregulation at night based on your circadian rhythm that will cause either high or lows in the morning. You can wake up with a 79 and you can be at 150 by the end of the day. So keep that in mind too when checking blood sugars.
I like it. What do you got?
Okay.
What do you got?
Do you have another question on there?
Is there anything different than what I had? We lost volume. Hang on. I don't have audio. Try that. I got it. We're good.
Right now?
Go ahead.
Okay. What if, and it might have been because I was looking at the thing. So this question is from Don. We love Don. What if high food and low movement is raising blood? So I think the first thing is this morning glucose or is this postprandial glucose? Is kind of the question I would ask.
Let's stop
I don't know if Don's on or not.
You explained it a little bit, but for people that don't understand, morning glucose is mostly going to be regulated by a hepatic response, like pumping out glucose. That's awakening response, right? Cortisol levels will affect that circadian rhythm. Whereas during the day, yes, if you're stressed, it's still going to affect your blood glucose. However, eating is going to release insulin from your pancreas, right? And you're going to have, that's primarily what postprandial glucose is looking like. So when Sonia is saying like the difference between the two, how are you utilizing carbohydrates at meals versus what is your awakening response? These are 2 different levels. So in an ideal world, you may see your postprandials. By the end of the day, it could be a little bit higher, but in an ideal world, you shouldn't see like a huge gap. Like if someone has a postprandial of 78 and their fasting is 110, that tells me that we're getting a hard cortisol awakening response, but you're actually utilizing carbohydrates efficiently during the day. So
and you might actually be dropping too low at
and
night
having a spike
with that lower blood glucose, and your body's having a spike
so there's,
to regulate it.
Yeah, it's important to understand the difference between those 2 things. And then again, like if we're talking just purely stress, like I've even had cases, I mean, I'm sure you have too, where again, this seems counterintuitive, but we increase food, reduce activity, and blood glucose still goes down. And that's purely a cortisol and adrenal issue at that point. You know, I mean, because let's be honest, if you come in and your blood glucose is a 110 and you're eating 900 calories and you're doing training 6 days a week, that is not a food issue. That is probably not a pancreas issue. That is a stress issue. Like you're hardly eating anything.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Inflammation and stress will drive that.
Yeah, that's not a case of like your pancreas. You don't have pancreatic insulin resistance or cellular insulin resistance. You have a stress issue.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw this out there as well. High waking fasted blood glucose is not a reason to take metformin. If you take metformin and you don't need help modulate, like with the uptake of glucose inside of your body, you can actually dysregulate and create more of a resistance later on. And you can actually start to see those postprandial numbers rise despite being on something that's supposed to lower them. So it's important to not react or just take a supplement, specifically a prescription drug used to lower glucose levels as a glucose disposal agent for a better pump or performance in the gym. It can actually create the opposite effect over time. So just wanted to throw that in there because I know people like to use metformin as a GDA. I did. I thought it kind of works the same. It doesn't work the same.
So that is what that is a compensatory effect. So what happens essentially is that when you don't have enough blood glucose, this is especially going to happen in people with adrenal insufficiency, because what tends to happen in those cases is they have these dips in blood glucose because they don't have enough cortisol, right? So they can't maintain. And our adrenals and liver are why we don't die in the middle of the night when we're fasting. We don't dip, our blood glucose doesn't dip to zero. So sometimes what happens is we will have dips in the middle of the night because we do dip too low in our adrenal function, and then that will cause that subsequent spike. Or like even sometimes people have those, I call them like adrenal dumps in the middle of the night, where it's like you will drop too much and then you wake up at like 2 a.m. and you're like hungry or like alert, right? That's a case of that's not like doing something with your carbohydrates before bed is probably going to have kind of a minimal effect on that. I mean, it might help a little bit if you have some, like fructose or something in there, but in reality, like those are stress issues.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on, I have a guess onto Dawn's question about why would high food, low movement create a spike in glucose, but I'm curious what your thoughts are first.
I guess, I mean,
because mine's really going to be
in a person that doesn't have a stress issue, it would, right? Because it's going to cause, I mean, if you eat more and do less, your glucose is going to go higher. It just depends on, the only time you're going to see glucose drop when you eat less or when you eat more and do less is if you're drastically reducing stress. So that's...
She was saying 160 was her glucose level. Now, I don't know. I don't know if she's on or not, but I don't know if this was postprandial or morning.
160 is pretty high.
160 is pretty high. I would say one of two things. I would say that you're pushing carbs a little bit too high, movement a little bit too low, like you had just said. Or we're looking at more of a cellular damage, pancreatic. Think about the cells in the pancreas not processing the way that they're supposed to, whether this is liver, pancreas cell, if there's something else going on in there like detoxification or bogged up. But I would say there might be a connection point for receptor sites there that's off. But it depends on how, all this is kind of like hard because it just like depends. I don't think this is not a common thing that we'll see. Typically it's like a very high overactive system that's on high alert, which this I think is probably one of those situations, on top of you've now completely taken away training or really minimized it. And then you've pushed food really high. And if you're a smaller person, that can
this wasn't really our topic, but I do think that sometimes people take this feeding up to as an absolute, and
or they have a number.
You have to understand that feeding up is very contextual, and it can be slow, it can be fast, it can be high, it can be moderate. There's so many things that are going to go into like how quickly or how much you feed someone up. And also, I think it's important to remember that restoration of any process doesn't happen efficiently in a deficit, but that also doesn't mean you have to be in like a gigantic surplus either. It just means that sometimes, if the person's really compromised and I can't feed them up as much as I want, just being at maintenance is enough to like get us out of that compromised state. And then as they get better, I can kind of walk them up more. I don't need them to, like,
Yeah.
I'm not like, okay, we came in and we have to get you to 300 grams of carbs like by the end of the month.
Yeah, I think that people get married to numbers. 2,300 calories, 500 grams of this. It's like, it's you can't, and you also have to look at a person's size. It's not fair to assume somebody who's 170 and somebody who's 120 should be at the same size. You can't just assume, well, this person's an ectomorph because they're smaller. It's like, that's not necessarily how genetics work. You got to be mindful of that. And also, like, I think that it's very easy to skip the DNA factors, like our genetic disposition, how we specifically are going to utilize carbohydrates, fats, how we utilize things like CoQ10, like how our mitochondria function. There's a genetic aspect to a lot of this, and it's not necessarily a one size fits all, or just because this person does this, this should also work. Genetics plays a bigger part into some of this than people think, from how we process, like I said, carbohydrates to how we absorb specific vitamins like B12, vitamin D. Our bodies are different genetically. So I think that that's kind of a hard yet black or white question, but it really just kind of like we said, like it just depends. That's where we're working with
and
coach
this, and when we say genetics, we're really talking, we're talking genetics, but we're also talking epigenetics, where epigenetics, so essentially, and Sonia, you and I have talked about this topic a lot, where essentially in our demographic, what we are having a lot of is we're having epigenetic adaptations over time, which essentially means, like, think of it this way. Epigenetics are controlling these on-off switches, processes like methylation that basically say, like, hey, if we stress this person out, their thyroid conversion is going to drop, their cortisol is going to go up, all these things. Now, what we see in the coaching realm is that all of the adaptations are the same. It's just they're happening faster, right? Because this person's epigenetically has adapted. Because the problem is that most of these cases, even though people, they come in and they're like, hey, I've had this problem for 6 months. No, this problem was created over 6 years. You know what I mean? It's like,
people want to know, when did it happen, coach?
Right.
What do you think it was? And it's like,
it's an epigenetic. So, and we can even trace this back. Like I've pondered this a ton with myself, even because you look at my off seasons and preps. So I had a history of, I wrestled, which was a weight controlled sport for a long time, for years, right? Weight control, weight control, weight control, weight control. So I would go out on a limb and probably say that there was some epigenetic adaptation long term that was created by this. I also see this with people that were like long distance runners or chronically, like, right, anything.
Dieters.
So when we're doing this over decades of time, these epigenetic changes, they take a long time to swing back the other direction. Right, Sonia? Example A. Or me. Never.
Yeah. Like, you're like, this is, and it's like, so what extreme, and we can go down a rabbit hole this, how extreme do you need to get to reset that?
Sometimes.
It can be extreme.
Right. Yeah.
It can be extreme. And then, but I would honestly say 90% of the time, it doesn't need to be extreme. But there are outliers. But I don't think, the same caveat, I don't think everyone needs an extreme thing to reset. I think that you can,
time's always
time.
It's time.
And
that's the hard part. Time.
Yeah. Time's uncomfortable. Any time is uncomfortable, right? Like time and waiting and like it's a lot. And you're like,
and it's actually, frankly, it's actually uncomfortable for us even as a coach, because like we know we're doing the right thing, but we have to tell you guys to continue to do the same thing that we know is working, but you just need to do it longer, and it's difficult. So yeah,
it's hard. Yeah.
Perfect.
So good questions though.
Cool.
How to get rid of inflammation specifically in the stomach.
Okay.
without cutting
Okay.
weight. That sounds like a hormonal issue to me, like maybe like an estrogen driven issue or an insulin response to the body.
I mean,
so I would say testing is going to be your
yeah,
first
where is it
foremost on that.
where is it coming from? That's the
lab.
question. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, if it's purely like a gut dysbiosis issue or something, we're talking about like intestinal permeability, inflammation, IBD, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be different than, than a hormone issue. So we're going to have two different solutions to that. Because unfortunately, so much of our immune system is located in the gut that's kind of the first place that we always see it. Like, even if it doesn't originate as a gut issue, because a lot of times gut issues don't originate as gut issues. They originate as a stress response or something else. It's just that we see them first in the gut because that's where most of it is created, right? Like, it's not like we're getting clients that are coming in, they have gut dysbiosis because they ate McDonald's 4 times a day. Like, that's not our population.
No.
I mean, shit, those people would be easy to fix, like Gen Pop off the street. We're like, clean that shit up,
Yeah, it's.
Yeah,
we do
once
get
in a
those
while,
people
and
every once in a while. And
I'm like, easy.
And they're the best before and afters. Cortisol, you know what I mean? Like, you're just like, CRP's 27 and we slam dunk and now we're down to 2. And
money
like,
in the bank. That's simple.
Awesome. It's like,
my
my
dream,
is great. But
my dream client, my dream
it's...
client is someone that comes in that's overweight because they overeat. But that's like almost none of them.
I love
like
those people.
2%.
I love those people. But then you're working
right, which can be difficult.
Habits,
right.
And they're normally addiction-driven habits, and that can be harder, binge eating. So it's everyone's, but a lot of times I would say the first thing I would do if this client was coming to me is I would say, let's go ahead and run some labs and let's figure out, one, is this inflammation? Is this fat gain? Is this water? Like, so those are like different systems, right? Are you holding water due to an estrogen issue? Is this actually like a body fat issue? Is this more of an inflammatory response inside of the gut? So those are all different things. And some things that you can ask yourself is, with inflammation, am I having inflammation in my joints, other areas of my body? Okay, yes or no? Because normally you'll have systemic inflammation, not just necessarily one thing. Am I having digestive issues alongside of this, like inflammation in the gut? Or am I having dysregulated cycles? Am I having a 28-day cycle? Am I ovulating? Am I having painful ovulations or painful cycles? Those can kind of help put you in like the right direction of where you want to go with those things. Yeah. Do you want to see if anyone else has any questions to throw in there? And then I can ask the last one.
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask where we at on time.
People want to.
Because I do have an appointment. I have a question after this.
Yeah.
Okay, 6:50. Yeah, we'll run for another 5 minutes. If anyone has a question they want to drop, I don't see any, but we just talked for 50 minutes straight too. You got to remember, I'm still compromised over here. Okay. Yeah.
A compromised Austin stout's not really saying
you wouldn't
much,
know
dude.
it. I know. I show up no matter what.
Yeah. But the last thing I said this person said, I already asked Austin about keeping adrenals well.
That's okay. Okay.
Keep them in check.
Well,
but
here's what I'll say. If you pay attention, your body will always tell you. That is my life lesson, is that nothing ever happens without a sign. If your body is stressed, and you respond to that by, we'll put it this way, looking at like a day doesn't necessarily mean anything. A couple days doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if I'm seeing like otherwise healthy person that is having negative biofeedback over a couple weeks or something like that, I'm going to be much more inclined to just get ahead of that, take some rest, sort it out, be done. Because this is where, when we start ignoring it, then we do. That's not an adrenal issue, though. That's just like an acute stress response. Yeah, your cortisol is probably a little elevated, but like that stuff we can we can fix. We're in and out. So I guess it depends on like how chronic the problem is.
I think biomarkers, like some biomarkers that you can utilize without, if you're not working with coach, I'm sure people who are working with coach are tracking some sort of biofeedback, or at least, God, I hope we're there in that industry by now, dude. But sex drive is a biofeedback marker for women. Are you having a sex drive? Are you having vaginal moisture? Guys, are you getting hard? That's a biofeedback marker, right? Estrogen, metabolism, all those things. Digestion, are you having diarrhea? Are you pooping daily? Are you constipated? That's a biofeedback marker. Are you sleeping through the night? Are you waking up feeling rested, or are you waking up wired? That's a biofeedback marker. And then like obviously trackable things like fasted blood glucose can be one, resting heart rate. Weight is actually a biofeedback marker for like stress response inside of the body. You'll see people who are dealing with a lot more dysregulation have higher and lower swings to things, especially in response to like training. Every day after training, they're up 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds versus maybe a normal 1 pound that they were. Like when you see those markers start to change, that's a good indication that you're not recovering from your training. Your inflammation from your training has gone up. So that's another way and that's more like in bodybuilding specifically, like if you can keep an eye on those things.
So,
morning waking temperature, that's
so I would
in
say,
adrenal health as well.
yeah, those are perfect. That's just all the stuff that I use. I would say that which ones we use depends on the person's level of awareness. If they're really good at giving feedback, then it's going to be pretty simple. I mean, we're going to be able to look at all the things Sonia said, and we're going to be able to tell. It's not difficult. Yeah. If they're not as good at giving feedback, then we may want those quantitative markers a little bit more, the glucose, the resting heart rate. Some people like HRV, whatever. Those are going to maybe be a little more helpful if the person's not, maybe they're newer or they're just not very honest with themselves, you know? So that's how we would kind of determine like because I'm not using the same, I mean, I like certain markers, but I'm not necessarily using the same biofeedback with each person.
No.
So it's kind of like what's available.
Yeah. I think that sometimes less is more.
Yeah, I mean, again, like we've seen that one pan out. Like, now you have a tracker, you can track 1,500 different things, and then great way to make your blood glucose go up is panic before every time you check your blood glucose. Surefire way to make it to go up.
Yeah. Or like you wake up and you're like, oh, my Oura ring said I slept like shit. I guess I slept like shit. And it's like, okay, but how do we feel? That's like moving away from that total thing. So I think less is more on that one.
Sweet.
Cool. We nailed them on those ones.
So I will repost so everyone will be able to see this if they want to go back and listen to anything. Perfect. And thanks for the questions. All right. Have a good night.
Cool. Awesome. Night. Bye.